Welcome to my top 100 board games of all time. I'm very excited to start with the first 10 games, numbers 91 to 100, almost all of which I have a copy here, so I'm excited to talk about these, so let's just get to it. My number 100 is Stone Age, and it's kind of deceptive that I have this box here because I'm actually missing some components, so I can't really play this game without pulling meeples from another game to serve as the game pieces and score trackers and the like. I really think it's a good introductory worker placement game. It's one I really enjoy, and if I'm going to play something a little simpler, it's a game that I would choose to play often. Its previous rank on my last top 100 was 49. Its weight is about a 4 out of 10, maybe a 3. And it will play 2 to 4 players. This is, and has been, sort of a default go-to game for introducing people to worker placement games. That, along with Lords of Waterdeep, which will, in all likelihood, be coming up later. But the thing is, you see this little bit of text right here, where it says that it takes 60 to 90 minutes? Horrible, horrible lies. I hope whoever wrote this went to confession after, because that is a whopper. This game takes like 3 hours, maybe more. It is absurdly long for the kind of game it is, and is probably the main reason I don't play this more, and also definitely the main reason why this isn't higher on my list. If this actually played in 60 to 90 minutes, or even just consistently 2 hours or less, I'd play this a whole lot more. Component issues that I'm missing laid aside. However, I do recommend it. It's just, you might have to settle on it being the only game you play that particular evening if this is the one you end up selecting. Either way, it's a very strong game, and I'm happy to start off my top 100 with a game that I already like so much. So that is my number 100, Stone Age. My number 99 is Cerebria, The Inside World. This is a fairly large and fairly hefty box. Fun fact, I was told that what I was buying when I got this was just the regular edition that didn't have the miniatures. I guess the previous owner never really played this, because I just dug into the box and I found, lo and behold, the miniatures for this game in there, which is a nice bonus, and they are attractive ones. Maybe I'll get them painted at some point. It is new to my list. This is the first time it's appeared in my top 100. It's relatively new to me. Its weight is a 10 out of 10. It is very complex. And the number of players to play it's 2, probably 3 with the expansion, because it's a team versus team game. So there's 2 teams, but the expansion ends a 3rd team. 4 players will likely be fine. 2 teams of 2, and not probably 5, because then you'd have to have like 2 teams having 2 players and the 3rd team having a single player, and that would unbalance how to play. But it'd probably be fine at 6. I only play this 2 players so far, and it might have been higher had it not been a game that I've only had the chance to play once. But this is a pretty niche game. It's from Mind Clash Games, and they're known for creating games that are a little odd, complicated, and with peculiar themes. I do like it. It is a race to a certain set number of points, and there's a lot of tension that results from that, which I think is true for the best games that tend to have that mechanism in them. It's sort of an area control game where you're manipulating where you move, and also which cards and which special powers are triggered. There's also a more complex version of the game that I didn't play. I just played the base version because it was already extremely rules heavy to get it played once. My brother, who usually rolls his eyes whenever I try to make him play something complicated, really actually liked this one, so I could probably get it played with him again. And maybe we could take a shot at taking on the more complex rule set this time. I don't know. It's already a lot of rules, but then again, why not just keep a few more on it? I would like to try to get it played 4 players and have a full team game rather than just controlling 2 characters each. And I would like to maybe try a 3-player game to see how the expansion third one, because you're either the forces of gloom or the forces of happiness, essentially. And so you're trying to either get things as gloomy as possible or as happy as possible. And the third team that comes in would be a team that is trying to be balanced between the two. So you're trying to make sure that it doesn't swing too far in either direction. That's interesting to me, but again, that's more rules to have to learn if I was going to integrate the third person. So I would probably have to pick between trying the more advanced rule set and just playing a gloom versus happiness team, two teams game, either with 2 or 4 players, or just trying to integrate the expansion of the third team in a 3-player game. I suppose if I really wanted to, I could try it at 6 with 3 teams of 2, but this is already a kind of a long, involved game as it is. It's peculiar. It feels like a game that only exists because this particular publisher exists, and for that, I think it's worth trying if you have a chance. If you have a friend who has a copy, maybe see if they'd be willing to pull it off their shelves and play it with you, because I think there's a really interesting, complex little game in this one. That's my number 99, Cerebria. I gotta get this played again at some point. My number 98 is QE. QE is an auction game without any limits. You can bid whatever you want, and there are no restrictions. There's just one minor catch, which is the person who bids the highest total amount of money in the game ends up losing. So it very much simulates inflation. It is a game that can be maybe a little fragile if you're not playing with the right group. I know my mother has actually sworn off this game with some of my other relatives because they just start bidding at like 37 million quintillion, like right off the bat, and then just keep going up from there, which I don't understand, because it doesn't actually improve the gameplay experience, because you're just starting the inflation with like larger numbers of zeros. There's no real reason to do it. But the problem is, I don't know how you could integrate a rule that would force you to start low, because you have to have that option to bid aggressively and have that double think of like, how aggressive is the other person going and how much do I have to bid to just outbid them a little bit more. So I don't know how you would fix that and start the inflation at more manageable numbers so that you're reaching, by the end of the game, numbers in the billions rather than like bidding a Google, which is sort of what it's happened. I haven't had that experience. It's been good for me. This game was last time ranked number 40 on my list, so it's dropped a fair amount. Its weight is about a 3 out of 10, and it'll play comfortably 3 to 5 players. I like auction games to begin with, and this one's got a real interesting hook in terms of offering you the difficulty of trying to stay competitive in your bidding while also worrying about if you've spent too much. And you don't know, because a lot of the information is hidden from you. You get to occasionally see some of what other people are bidding, but that doesn't give you all the information on exactly how much money other people have bid. So there's a real open question of like, if you're winning things and you've got lots of points coming to you, have you overbid? And there's not an easy way to tell except by finding out you bid 5 billion and you still lost. So you know whoever bid at least bid more than that. So that's QE. Great auction game. But you might have to play it with people who have a similar sense of view of what a reasonable place to start the bidding is, and then, go from there. I guess if you really want to bid starting with like 15 to 20 zeros, you can, but that just makes it less playable. So, because you can do the same thing just starting from a lower number, so why not just start at like a few thousand? I don't know. Anyways, so pick your fellow players smart with this one. my number 98, QE. My number 97 is Space Base, which is new to my list. Its weight is about a 3, and it plays 2 to 5 players. Space Base is a game that sort of fits in the category of something like Machi Koro, even a little bit of Catan, where you're rolling some dice, and depending on probability, you're going to get different benefits. You might get cash, you might get points, and you usually have the chance to turn some cash into cards, which will improve your ability to get further cash or points. I don't know how to describe it as anything other than just making Machi Koro completely obsolete. I see no reason to ever play that game when this one exists. Is it perfect? No. It's maybe a little intimidating looking. If you take a look at the back there, it looks like there's a fair amount going on for a game that is actually rather on the light side. But if you can get people past that, they're going to rapidly see that this is a game that is perfectly accessible, that can play fairly quickly, and that is an excellent gateway style game. I haven't dabbled with any of the expansions, although I would be interested in giving them a try. I just haven't looked too much into which ones are better or worse. I think one of them was essentially just a larger box for holding the expansion stuff. It's a game that I think I can get very easily played with my family, and sometimes that sort of has a reverse effect on my psychology, where I know they will want to play it, so I usually try to push something else instead, or just choose not to bring it because I know it'll just be the one they end up making me play. I don't know. I don't know why I'm like that, but either way, I really thoroughly enjoy the experience when I do play this, and it really feels like you're building quite the little empire for yourself by the time you finish the game. And it handles like probabilities with usually rolling 2 dice in a really smart and accessible way. So that's Space Base. Highly recommend it. Give it a shot. If you want to play something with like family members who are not gamers or friends that are not gamers, this is one that you'll probably enjoy if you play it with them, and that they won't have huge problems picking up. Unless they really need a completely dirt simple game, this one might be just a tad too complex for people who are like that. But otherwise, it's a great game. So that's my number 97, Space Base. My number 96 is Iwari, which is new to my list. Its weight is 5 and plays 2 to 5 players. The game I played of it was 4, and it shot onto my list because I just thought it was a really clever area control game that I think was based on an older design, and it makes sense because it has the feeling of a more classic Euro, but it also has this sort of nice nature themes, sort of spirits themed aesthetic, which is very pleasing and almost relaxing to behold. The card art was quite lovely, but it is very much something that can get cutthroat because you're very much like cutting people off and taking points away from them. It's indirect interaction, but it's still getting in people's faces a fair amount because you can take something away from them the turn before they were going to claim it themselves. And that's always frustrating to have to deal with. But in this one, I find it's more the fun kind of frustrating that you actually remember and think upon fondly. Iwari is a game I would like to get a copy of, but it does seem to be out of print currently. But I'm keeping my ear to the ground just in case it does end up getting some a new print run coming out or another Kickstarter for it. Would recommend. I just don't have it here because I don't own it. If I get a copy, it could certainly shoot up on my list. I think it's very, very good. So that is my number 96, Iwari. My number 95 is Five Tribes, and no, it wasn't intentional that I put it at a 5 slot on my list. That's just sort of the way the list fell out. Its previous ranking is 82, so it slipped slightly, but not that much considering the number of new games that I've added to the list since last year's list. Its weight is about a 6 out of 10, and it'll play 2 to 4 players. Five Tribes is a game that has a lovely production. Winning theme. The Arabian Nights theme is very winsome, and the art is just charming and kind of brings you in. The actual gameplay is kind of a variant of Mancala, where you're picking things up and dropping them off one, not stone, but rather meeple at a time, in going in specific directions in order to claim colors. So, for it to be a valid move, the last meeple that you drop off has to be of the same color of at least one meeple where you drop it. So if you drop a blue meeple on a spot that has 2 other blue meeples, you're going to trigger the blue action for at a strength of 3, because that's how many that were there when you dropped the last one, and then you would remove those 3 from the board. The gameplay is somewhat abstract, but there's also an interesting bidding mechanism for turn order, which can be kind of crucial if there's a big point play on the board, and it can make a difference whether or not you get it. There's lots of different ways to get points. There's a fair amount of variety in the game. I have the older, considered more problematic version, which has people who are slaves in the pictures, and while that isn't great, there's a bunch of board games that have problematic stuff going on with like colonialistic themes, and so I just kind of brush it aside and take it for what it's worth. The newer edition, I think, replaced them with something that functioned identically in terms of gameplay, but they weren't actual people you own. And, generally I try not to own people. I would say I rarely own other human beings. So, take that. Obviously, I'm morally superior to you. Very fun game. Would recommend it. But if you have problems with analysis paralysis, this is not your game. Because the number of sheer permutations that can exist, especially at the start, is overwhelming. So if you're a person that sits there until you've personally calculated every possible move, you can't play this game because it will take 8 hours from the first turn to go through every single possible move, and people will pack up and leave before you get to take your first turn. And B, it's just not going to be fun for you. So I recommend this, but with a caveat. Don't play it if you're an analysis paralysis prone person, or if you're playing with analysis paralysis prone people. That's it. Otherwise, great game. Five Tribes. My number 94 is Glass Road. Now, this is a game that I actually played probably back in, would have been 2015 in all likelihood, when I was just starting to get more seriously into board games as a hobby. Yeah, and I always had it in the back of my mind as a game I would like to sort of circle back to. When it came back in print, I thought, I really don't have an Uwe Rosenberg midweight game. And that was kind of enough to put it on my radar. I got around to playing it again, and I was rather pleased with what's in there. It's considerably less overwhelming now, playing it in 2022 after having been a hobbyist board gamer for closer to a decade than not. But it's a game that is very much about the sort of economic stuff that is typical of an Uwe Rosenberg game, of like collecting resources and then cashing those resources in for points. But it's faster. It's also a little bit more bare bones in those elements, and focuses more on the sort of double think of playing cards and being able to trigger cards if your opponent plays the same card that you have in your hand. You don't it keeps the opponent from getting the full benefit of that card, and you yourself get a benefit from that card when they do that. So you're trying to pick cards not only based on what you need to do, but you're trying to pick cards based on what your opponents are going to pick. And most recently I've played this at 2. It really seems like it might shine more as a game at 3 or 4 players, so I would like to get a game with that many players played of this one. But even without having played it in that, I think it's a much simpler game than something like Agricola or A Feast for Odin, without compromising the tricky decisions that tend to come from those games. And so I think this is a game that I'm going to have some opportunities to play that I wouldn't necessarily have if I just packed A Feast for Odin or Agricola in my game bag every single time. I think I can play this with my family more easily. I think I can play this with a whole swath of people more quickly and more readily than I can play those 2 heavier worker placement games that I have. It's also not a worker placement game. It's just about card play and what those cards let you do. And it has an interesting mechanism where the resource wheel, anytime you get to at least one or more of all the basic types of resources, the wheel rotates and takes away one of each of those, and then gives you a premium resource that is created from having at least one of those, and it triggers automatically. It's not your choice, which means you have to be careful when you decide to trigger it if you really need certain resources for other purposes. I think it's cool. I think it's fast. I think it's a strong game. And for Uwe Rosenberg, it's nice to have a game of his that is not either a quite heavy worker placement game or a little tile laying game, but somewhere closer to in the middle. So I would recommend it, and I think you'd enjoy it quite a bit if you're into resource collection games, but you're looking for something that is a little bit lighter and a little bit quicker. That is my number 94, Glass Road. Forgot to mention about Glass Road. It's new to my list, although, again, I played it once several years ago. Its weight is about a 5 out of 10, and will play 1 to 4 players. My number 93 is Architects of the West Kingdom. This is new to the list. It is a weight of about 6 out of 10, and will play 1 to 5 players. Architects of the West Kingdom is, in some ways, a fairly typical worker placement game. You're fulfilling contracts, you're going to spaces. Some of the spaces will give you specific resources, others will give you different abilities. A lot of it's fairly standard, but it has just a simple little couple of twists. One of which is that as you add more workers to a space, you get rewarded with resources based on the total number of workers that are there of your color, as opposed to simply a flat rate of you get 2 wood for this particular worker placement spot. And then as you get more and more guys out on the board, someone can take a capture action to throw all your guys in jail. And the more you have these large groups that give you tons of resources clumped together, the more potential for your opponents to round all of those guys up, throw them in jail, and get a nice little reward for it. I think that's interesting, and I think it's enough of a twist that I would want to play this over, say, something like Stone Age, because I think there's a little bit more going on here in terms of the complexity of the game that you're playing, and it's maybe just a little bit too far past an introductory level worker placement game. It's almost light enough that it could work in that case, but even then it would only be introductory for a worker placement game, which is a genre that tends to skew heavier in terms of complexity anyway. So I do recommend it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as your first worker placement game, but maybe as your 3rd or 4th or 5th worker placement game, this might be a good one to try out. Again, the complexity, I give it 6 out of 10, and maybe you could talk me down to giving it a 5 out of 10. But there's just those 2 little twists that I mentioned are enough to sort of spice this up and give it some identity that gives it a place in my collection as something I would want to play more than just once every 4 or 5 years, which is where I'm sort of at with some bog standard worker placement games that I like, but don't necessarily like enough to put in my, say, top 100 or maybe 200 games. So that is my number 93, Architects of the West Kingdom. My number 92 is Marco Polo 2 in the Service of the Khan, which previous ranking was 76 on my last list. Its weight is about an 8 out of 10, and it plays 2 to 4 players. So Marco Polo 2 is a game that is known for being a couple of things. One, a dice worker placement game, which means the workers that you actually use are dice, and they give you different abilities and different places that you can go and different amounts of resources depending on which number exactly you're spending. So what you do in this game is you roll all of your 6 dice and you figure out what you want to do with them by placing them out one or more at a time on specific spots. That's cool. It's also known for having like fairly strong special powers, which was definitely the reputation of the previous game, which is simply called The Voyages of Marco Polo. This is a sequel game, and I believe there's some kind of compatibility between the two, although I haven't played the first game, so this is just what I hear. And the special... It's sort of a combination of a sequel game and a reworking, from what I understand, that the traveling action was somewhat streamlined in this one. I think it's neat. I think it's a game that the special powers are neat, and the dice worker placement aspect is neat, but to me it just feels like a fairly straightforward, heavier worker placement Euro game. And that's like right down the center of the bowling alley in terms of what's going to appeal to me. If anything, that's its biggest problem, is the fact that it goes like straight down the middle with like no spin for what appeals to me, and is maybe going to result in, well, since I'm not a very good bowler, a 7-10 split, which is enough of a victory for me because it means I still got 8 out of the 10 pins. And maybe a chance for 9 out of 10 if I get one more good shot. I don't really know where I'm going with this metaphor, but apparently I need to work on my bowling game. Marco Polo 2 is a game that presents an interesting puzzle. It doesn't outstay its welcome. I've only really played it at 2 players. I've played it online. I've played it in person. I think I would like to get this one played, but it's just sitting in a range on my list where I'd be very excited to play them, but they're also not the games I'm pulling from my shelf first to try to get them played. So it's a little bit of a deeper cut, and as a result, it's just not going to get played super large amounts. But you know what? If I just play this every couple of years, I'm perfectly happy with that. I think it's an interesting enough game that I think I'll have plenty to discover, over the next decade of owning it, even if I only play like 5 times in that span. So I would recommend it. You might get more out of it if you really like the idea of using dice as workers, or if you like the idea of having very distinctive special powers. I like both of those things, but they're not the things in gaming that I'm most in love with. If you're more in love with those ideas, I think you might like this one considerably more than I do. I don't think it's an issue of quality. I think there's a very strong underlying game here. So give it a try. Either this one or the original, I believe. I would just go with whatever's more available, but if they're both equally available to you, maybe get the sequel version, because I've heard that it's a little bit more streamlined than the original version. But yeah, give either one a try. Marco Polo 2, my number 92. So my number 91 is, after a run of a number of Euro games, some of which were on the heavier side, a little filler, which is called Biblios. Its previous ranking was 75, so it's fallen only a small amount. And again, that's not much of a fall considering the number of new games that have gone onto my list. Its weight is about a 2 out of 10. It's quite easy to play, and will play 2 to 4 players. Biblios is a couple of things I really like. One is themes about monks. I feel like I have not played enough board games about monks in my life, and it's nice that this one is about inscribing things, apparently. Okay, so the theme doesn't really matter. It also has multicolored dice on it that are like blue and brown and green and red and yellow, and it doesn't really matter because they're just tracking the number of points each of those colors is worth. So that's not terribly exciting. Nor is it terribly exciting that you're inscribing books. The art is nice. It's by a publisher, Yellow, who usually does decently looking games. But it's just a really strong filler game with two halves. It's also very comparable to a game that I might have coming up later on my list called For Sale, where it's also an auction game in two halves. The first half of the game is a little push your luck thing where you take one card at a time and either give it to yourself, at which point you can get no more cards, give it to your, put it available for your opponents, or put it aside for an auction in the second half of the game. And you have to do that one at a time with a number of cards depending on the number of players until all of them have been given out. So if you keep giving cards out to the other players, you might get stuck with the last card that you pick up and it's for you and you don't like it and it doesn't help you. Well, too bad. You pushed your luck and your luck ran out. That's interesting. But more interesting is taking the cards from the first half, which you got through the first half, through people deciding whether they go to opponents or to themselves, taking those cards and using them to bid for the cards that are in the 5 different color sets, and also using cards to move the value of those color sets up or down. And then you're just basically seeing who wins in each color suit, and you get the number of points based on the number of pips showing on the die. So you could win 3 different colors. They add up to 5 points because they were driven down in value. And then one person wins a single color that has a value of 6, and they beat you based on that. So that's all very interesting stuff. And it's not very difficult to explain, and it's quite quick to play. It's a really good filler, and I haven't played it in a while, and I really should get around to giving it another try. Probably best at 3 players to play, but 4 players is very good, and 2 players is pretty decent. Would recommend it. I think you'll have a good time if you're looking for something quick and light. So that is my number 91 Biblios. So that is my first 10 on my top 100 list, which again were from 100 through 91: Stone Age, Cerebria, The Inside World, QE, Space Base, Iwari, 5 Tribes, Glass Road, Architects of the West Kingdom, Marco Polo 2 in the Service of the Khan, and Biblios. I hope you had a good time. I was certainly glad to start the list with so many Euro games. I would say at least 5 of these are confirmed Euro games, probably closer to 6. And it's probably an indicator of what's to come on that front, to be completely honest. But nothing to worry about. There will be plenty of other games as well. At least another 5 or 6 non-Euro games on the rest of the list. So, look forward to that.